Hello, and welcome back to the Crime Folio. Thank you for joining us once more as we unseal our records to examine the complexities that lead to the darkest of human acts. Of all human transgressions, betrayal is perhaps the most personal, the most profound. It is a poison that seeps into the foundations of trust. But what happens when that betrayal is enacted by someone who shares your own bloodline? Tonight's case is a chilling exploration of this very horror, a story where family bonds are not just broken, but violently torn apart, leaving a stain that can never be washed away. This is a betrayal in blood. Case 1. The Blackhawk Triangle Betrayal. Our story begins not in the chaos of a crime scene, but in the quiet, unassuming landscape of Star City, West Virginia. It is a place like so many others in America, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of Appalachia, where community ties are meant to be strong and life is meant to move at a slower, more predictable pace. It was here, amidst the ordinary backdrop of high school football games and sleepy suburban streets, that a friendship, in all its teenage intensity, was forged. The bond between Skylar Neese, Shalia Eddy, and Rachel Schoaf was, by all accounts, a force of nature. To their classmates at University High, they were an inseparable unit, a trio that navigated the treacherous waters of adolescence as one. They called themselves the Three Musketeers, a testament to their professed loyalty. Their social media profiles were a vibrant mosaic of their Bonda collection of smiling selfies, inside jokes, and declarations of sisterly love. Skylar was the anchor. 16 years old, she was a bright, vivacious honor student with a wide, infectious smile and a deep well of trust for the people she loved. She worked a part-time job at a local Wendy's, diligently saving money for a car, her eyes fixed on a future she believed was full of promise. She was the responsible one, the one her parents, Dave and Mary Neese, knew they could count on. They saw her friendship with Shalia and Rachel as a blessing, a source of joy and support for their only child. Shalia Eddy was the charismatic center of the trio. Popular, witty, and effortlessly cool, she drew people into her orbit with an easy charm. She was the leader, the one who often set the agenda for their adventures. Her bond with Skylar was particularly deep, stretching back to their childhood. They were, in the truest sense of the word, best friends. Rachel Schoaf was the quieter, more reserved member of the group. Often seen as the follower, she seemed content to exist within the vibrant world that Skylar and Shalia had created. She was earnest and eager to please, her identity seemingly intertwined with her place in the trio. To an outsider, their dynamic appeared perfectly balanced, supportive ecosystem of teenage friendship. But within the closed world of a three-person friendship, the dynamics are always more complex than they appear. A triangle is the strongest shape in geometry, but the most unstable in human relationships. By the spring of 2012, subtle, hairline fractures had begun to appear in the foundation of their bond. The change was almost imperceptible at first. A shared glance between Shalia and Rachel that excluded Skylar. Whispered conversations that would cease the moment she entered a room. Plans made without her. Skylar, with her intuitive nature, felt the shift acutely. She confided in her diary, her private entries painting a picture of growing isolation and confusion. The two people she trusted most in the world were drifting away, forming a new, more exclusive alliance. She was becoming the third wheel. The source of this schism was a secret, one that Shalia and Rachel guarded with increasing desperation. It was a secret that Skylar had become privy to, and her knowledge had transformed her from a confidant into a perceived threat. The exact nature of the secret remains a subject of public speculation, but court documents and testimony point towards an intimate relationship between Shalia and Rachel. Skylar knew. And in the paranoid world of teenage secrets, knowledge is power, and power is danger. Her frustration began to spill onto her public Twitter feed, a digital cry of anguish. On July 4th, 2012, just 2 days before she would vanish, she tweeted, "It really doesn't take much to piss me off," followed by, "Sick of being at home. Thanks, friends. Love hanging out with you all too." The sarcasm was a thin veil for her deep hurt. Her final tweet, posted on July 5th, was haunting in its simplicity. "You can't have a normal life when you're a teenager." The promise of their friendship, once a source of comfort and strength, had curdled into a source of anxiety and betrayal. Skylar felt it. Shalia and Rachel feared it. And in their fear, a dark and unthinkable plan began to take root. They decided that the only way to silence the threat was to silence Skylar herself. The promise of friendship was about to be rewritten in blood. The night of July 6, 2012, began as any other summer evening at the Neese residence. Skylar had finished her shift at Wendy's and returned to the small apartment she shared with her parents. She was in good spirits, chatting with her mother and father before retreating to her bedroom. At around 11 p.m., her father, Dave, poked his head into her room to say goodnight. He saw his daughter at her computer, a familiar and comforting sight. He told her he loved her. She said it back. It was the last time he would ever speak to her. Sometime after midnight, the promise of an adventure was made. A text message from Shalia lit up Skylar's phone. The proposal was simple. "Let's sneak out. Just the three of us. Let's drive around, smoke, and talk, just like old times." For Skylar, it must have felt like an olive branch, a chance to repair the fractures in their friendship, to reclaim the bond she so desperately missed. It was a promise to return to the way things were. A prom night promise, without the prom. Trusting her friends, believing in the possibility of reconciliation, Skylar agreed. At approximately 12:30 a.m., surveillance footage from a neighboring apartment complex captured a grainy, silent image that would later become the single most important piece of evidence in the case. A four-door sedan is seen pulling up to the edge of the Neese's apartment building. The back door opens. A figure, Skylar, quickly runs from her window, across a small patch of grass, and climbs into the car. The door closes, and the car drives away, disappearing into the darkness of the West Virginia night. Skylar Neese had left willingly. She had gone with her best friends. She had her cell phone with her, but took nothing else. No money, no change of clothes, no contact lenses. She left expecting to return within an hour or two, climbing back through her window and into the safety of her bed, the rift with her friends mended. She did not know that she was being driven to her own execution. The next morning, Mary Neese found her daughter's room empty. The window was open, a small footstool placed beneath it. Mary's first thought was annoyance. Skylar had snuck out. But as the hours ticked by with no word, annoyance curdled into a cold, creeping dread. Skylar wasn't answering her phone. She wasn't answering her texts. This was not like her. By late morning, Dave and Mary Neese contacted the Star City Police Department. Their daughter was missing. The first people they called for information were Shalia Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. Their response was a masterclass in calculated deception. Shalia claimed she had received a call from Skylar around 1 a.m., but hadn't seen her. She and Rachel both feigned ignorance and worry. In the days and weeks that followed, they became fixtures at the Neese household, offering comfort and support to Skylar's distraught parents. They wept with Mary. They helped Dave plaster missing posters all over town. Shalia even went on local news, her face a mask of sorrow, pleading for her best friend's safe return. On social media, she curated the image of a heartbroken friend, relentlessly tweeting about Skylar. "Skylar, I miss you more than words can describe. One post read. She tweeted at Skylar's account directly, as if she were just offline, a digital performance of grief for a public audience. For months, this facade held. The investigation stalled. The authorities, initially believing Skylar was a typical teenage runaway, were slow to grasp the sinister reality of the situation. They followed false leads, interviewed dozens of people, and searched the dense woods around Star City, all to no avail. Dave and Mary Neese, however, never believed their daughter ran away. They knew her. They knew her love for them, her plans for the future, and they began to notice inconsistencies in Shalia's story. Small details that didn't add up. The timeline she gave for her late-night call from Skylar seemed to shift. Their suspicion grew, but with no evidence, it remained a gut feeling, a parent's intuition screaming that something was terribly wrong. All the while, Shalia and Rachel lived their lives. They returned to University High in the fall, walking the same halls they once shared with Skylar. They went to parties, posted smiling pictures, and carried on as if a piece of their world wasn't missing. But beneath the surface, the weight of their secret was a corrosive acid. For Shalia, the deception seemed to come naturally. She was cold, confident, and unwavering. But for Rachel Schoaf, the guilt was a living thing, a shadow that followed her everywhere. Her behavior grew, increasingly erratic. She was plagued by anxiety and depression. Her grades plummeted. She was a ghost haunting her own life, tormented by the memory of that night in the woods. The pressure continued to build, a psychological siege that her teenage mind could not withstand. In late December 2012, nearly 6 months after Skylar's disappearance, Rachel Schoaf finally broke. She suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was admitted to a local psychiatric hospital. And there, in the sterile, quiet confines of her room, the truth came pouring out. On January 3, 2013, Rachel Schoaf confessed everything to the police. Her confession was a chilling, step-by-step account of a premeditated murder born of teenage jealousy and paranoia. She told investigators that she and Shalia had planned it for weeks. They had packed a murder kit, kitchen knives borrowed from their own homes, paper towels, cleaning supplies, and a shovel. They had chosen the location, a remote, wooded spot just across the state line in Wayne Township, Pennsylvania, a place where the three of them had sometimes gone to smoke marijuana. It was a place Skylar knew and trusted. On the night of July 6th, they had lured Skylar into Shalia's sedan with the promise of a joyride. They drove north, out of West Virginia, their conversation light and normal. Skylar had no reason to suspect a thing. When they arrived at the secluded spot, they all got out of the car. The plan was to attack her on the count of 3. As they stood there, in the darkness of the Pennsylvania woods, surrounded by the sound of crickets, Shalia, Eddie, and Rachel Schoaf looked at each other. They gave the signal. 1, 2, 3. On 3, they lunged, plunging their knives into their friend. The attack was brutal, frenzied, and merciless. Skylar tried to fight back, tried to run, but she was outnumbered and overpowered. In her confession, Rachel recounted Skylar's last, agonizing words as she bled on the forest floor. She looked at the 2 girls she had called her sisters, and with her final breath, she gasped, "Why?" It was a question they could never truly answer. They stabbed her until she was silent, more than 50 times. Their plan had been to bury her, to erase her from the earth completely. They had brought a shovel, but the ground was too hard, too rocky. Their efforts were futile. In a panic, they dragged Skylar's body to the edge of the woods and covered her with leaves, branches, and rocks. They then returned to the car, attempted to clean the blood, and drove back to Star City, re-entering their lives as if nothing had happened, leaving their best friend's body to the elements. Following her confession, Rachel Schoaf agreed to lead investigators to the location. On January 16, 2013, a team of law enforcement officers, guided by one of her killers, walked into the frozen Pennsylvania woods. There, under a thin blanket of snow, they found Skylar Neese's remains. The search was over. For Dave and Mary Neese, the discovery was the confirmation of their worst fears, a nightmare made real. But the identity of the killers was a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. The two girls who had cried in their home, who had hugged them and promised to help find Skylar, were the very monsters who had stolen her from them. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with Shylia Eddy's arrest. Even when confronted with Rachel's detailed confession, Shylia remained defiant, her mask of innocence unwavering. Police searched her car and found traces of Skylar's blood. They searched her room and found the murder weapon. The evidence was overwhelming. Yet it was a tweet she had posted months earlier, on September 29, 2012, that served as her most chilling public confession. Responding to a friend, Shylia wrote, in what seemed at the time like a random, nonsensical comment, "We really did go on 3." In the end, justice, in its legal form, was served. Rachel Schoaf, in exchange for her testimony, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 to 30 years in prison. Shylia Eddy, after initially pleading not guilty, eventually pleaded guilty to first-degree murder to avoid a trial. She was sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 15 years. But the story does not end with their convictions. The murder of Skylar Neese exposed the dark underbelly of adolescent relationships, where loyalty can be paper-thin and secrets can become deadly weapons. It is a testament to the fact that monsters do not always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes, they have the faces of those we love the most. In the wake of their unimaginable loss, Dave and Mary Neese channeled their grief into action. They fought tirelessly to change West Virginia law, leading to the passage of Skylar's Law. The law requires that Amber Alerts be issued for any missing child who is believed to be in danger, regardless of whether they are a suspected runaway. It was a legacy forged from tragedy, a way to ensure that their daughter's stolen future might help to protect another's. The prom night promise, in this case, was not one of romance, but of friendship, a sacred vow of trust and sisterhood. It was a promise whispered not under glittering lights, but in the everyday moments of a shared life. And its betrayal was absolute, a stark and horrifying reminder that the deepest wounds are often inflicted by the hands we once held. Skylar Neese trusted her friends, and for that trust, she paid the ultimate price. Her light was extinguished in a moment of unimaginable violence, but her memory serves as a permanent, cautionary tale, etched into the heart of a small West Virginia town. Case 2. The Car on Lover's Lane. Our records now turn to a different city, a different set of promises. We move from the wooded hills of Appalachia to the sprawling suburban landscape of Sacramento, California. Here, in the spring of 1998, another ritual of youth was unfolding, bathed in the hopeful glow of the West Coast sun. It was prom season, a time of boundless optimism, a milestone where teenagers stand on the precipice of adulthood, cloaked in borrowed finery and the intoxicating belief that the night holds infinite possibilities. For 17-year-old Aquila Flood, this belief was vibrant and real. A junior at Valley High School, Aquila was described by all who knew her as a beacon of light. She was beautiful, intelligent, and possessed a quiet confidence that drew people to her. She was a member of the school's ROTC program, demonstrating a discipline and focus that belied her years. Her family, particularly her mother, Sharon, saw in her a future brimming with potential. Aquila was on the cusp of everything, and the junior prom was to be a celebration of that journey. The promise of this particular night was personified in her date, 17-year-old Kevin McCall. To the outside world, Kevin was the epitome of the quiet, unassuming teenager. He was not a prominent figure in the school's social hierarchy. He was reserved, soft-spoken, and often kept to himself. He and Aquila had known each other for some time, their relationship a casual, teenage affair that had recently begun to develop. When he asked her to the prom, it seemed a natural, if not particularly dramatic, pairing. He was the quiet boy who, for one special night, would step into the spotlight alongside one of the school's bright stars. For Aquila's family, he was acceptable. He was polite. He was respectful. He presented no obvious red flags. He was simply Kevin, the boy who would be entrusted with their daughter for one of the most important nights of her young life. The implicit promise was clear, woven into the very fabric of the tradition. He would honor her, protect her, and bring her home safely. On the evening of May 23, 1998, that promise was sealed in a series of cherished, ordinary moments. There were the photographs on the front lawn, a ritual familiar to countless families. Aquila, radiant in a long, elegant white dress, a stark and beautiful contrast to her dark skin. Kevin, standing beside her, looking almost startled by the flash of the camera, dressed in a black tuxedo with a white vest that matched her gown. In one photo, he carefully pins a corsage of white flowers to her dress. In another, they stand side by side, a portrait of youthful hope, their whole lives seemingly stretched out before them. Her mother, Sharon, watched them go, a swell of pride and love in her heart. She had helped Aquila get ready, had fussed over the dress, had taken the pictures that were meant to preserve this perfect memory forever. The last time she saw her daughter alive, Aquila was smiling, her face alight with the excitement of the evening to come. She climbed into Kevin McCall's car, and together, they drove off toward the Sacramento Convention Center, toward the music and the lights, leaving behind a mother who trusted that the boy behind the wheel would honor his unspoken vow. The prom itself was, by most accounts, exactly what it was supposed to be. A cavernous hall filled with teenagers, a kaleidoscope of colorful dresses and awkward tuxedos, all moving under the spinning lights of a disco ball. For a time, Aquila and Kevin were part of the scene. They danced. They talked with friends. They moved through the crowd as just another couple enjoying the festivities. But as the night wore on, a subtle tension began to surface, a dissonance that only those paying close attention might have noticed. Kevin's quiet nature seemed to curdle into something else. He was not celebratory. He was watchful. Witnesses would later recall that he seemed possessive, his gaze following Aquila whenever she spoke to other friends, particularly other boys. The soft-spoken demeanor that seemed so harmless on a front lawn began to look like a sullen, brooding silence under the pulsing lights of the dance floor. An argument, quiet but sharp, was observed between them. The subject is lost to the noise of the evening, but the effect was clear. The joyous energy that had defined the beginning of their night began to evaporate, replaced by a strained and uncomfortable atmosphere. Aquila, ever poised, tried to smooth it over, but the crack had appeared. The perfect portrait was beginning to fracture. Sometime before the prom officially ended, they decided to leave. The promise now shifted to its final, most crucial phase, the journey home. This was the moment where the fantasy of the night was meant to transition back into the safety of reality. Aquila expected to be driven back to her front door, to kick off her shoes and recount the night's events to her mother. But Kevin McCall had a different destination in mind. He did not turn his car towards Aquila's neighborhood. Instead, he drove in the opposite direction, toward a place of darkness and isolation. He drove to an area known as Bill Conlin Youth Sports Park, a sprawling complex in South Sacramento. By day, it was a place of activity of baseball games and children playing. But at night, it was transformed. It was deserted, unlit, and remote. Its winding service roads and secluded parking lots near Strawberry Creek made it a de facto lovers' linea place where teenagers went to find privacy, away from the prying eyes of their parents. As the car left the city lights behind, the atmosphere inside must have changed dramatically. The festive music on the radio would have been replaced by the quiet hum of the engine and the sounds of the night. The promise of a safe return home was now officially broken. Aquila, perceptive and intelligent, would have known something was wrong. She would have questioned him. "Why are we here? Where are you going? Take me home." Her questions were met not with reassurance, but with a simmering rage that had finally found its moment to boil over. The quiet boy was quiet no longer. In the secluded darkness of the park, far from any potential witnesses, Kevin McCall's carefully constructed facade disintegrated completely. The perceived slight at the dance, the jealousy, the possessiveness, whatever dark cocktail of emotions had been brewing inside him erupted into uncontrollable violence. The attack was a brutal repudiation of everything the evening was supposed to represent. The hands that had gently pinned a corsage to her dress were now used to beat her. The boy who had promised to protect her became the monster she needed protection from. The fight was savage. The interior of the car, the site of their final journey together, became a scene of desperate struggle. Aquila fought for her life. Evidence would later show she scratched him, clawed at him, leaving his own DNA under her fingernails, a final, silent testimony of her defiance. But in the end, his rage was too much. He dragged her from the car and, on the cold ground near the creek, he strangled the life out of her. The white dress, a symbol of innocence and celebration, was now torn and dirted, a shroud for a life cut tragically short. The prom night promise was not just broken, it was violently, irrevocably betrayed. Leaving Aquila's body in a patch of weeds, Kevin McCall got back into his car and drove away. He went home. He looked at the scratches on his face and hands, the evidence of her final struggle, and he began to construct a story. He would have to explain her absence. He would have to explain his injuries. He washed away the physical traces of his crime, but the truth could not be so easily erased. Back at the Flood household, the hours after midnight ticked by with agonizing slowness. 1 a.m. came and went. Then 2 a.m. Sharon Flood sat by the phone, her initial anticipation turning to worry, then to a gnawing fear. This was not like Aquila. She was responsible. She would have called. Sharon began calling Aquila's pager, over and over, the unanswered beeps echoing the growing panic in her heart. She called friends. No one had seen her since she left the prom with Kevin. By dawn, the fear had given way to a certainty that something was terribly wrong. Sharon Flood contacted the Sacramento Police Department and reported her daughter missing. The investigation began immediately, and its focus narrowed with laser-like precision on the last person to see her alive, her prom date, Kevin McCall. When detectives brought him in for questioning, he was the picture of calm concern. But his story was full of holes. He claimed that he and Aquila had an argument on the way home from the dance. According to his version of events, she became so upset that she demanded he pull over, got out of the car a few blocks from her home, and stormed off into the night. He simply drove away, he claimed, leaving her there. It was a weak and improbable alibi. No responsible young man would leave his prom date on a dark street in the middle of the night. And then there were the scratches. When asked about the fresh, angry marks on his face, neck, and hands, he had another convenient explanation. He had gotten into a fight with his brother. The detectives were not convinced. They were looking at a boy who was trying to lie his way out of a nightmare and failing. They pressed him, pointing out the inconsistencies in his story. His calm demeanor began to crack under the pressure. As the interview wore on, his alibi crumbled piece by piece. The search for Aquila, meanwhile, was underway. It did not last long. Based on the direction Kevin was known to have driven and the likelihood of a secluded crime scene, search teams focused on the area around the sports park. On Sunday afternoon, less than 24 hours after she had left for the prom, a searcher made a devastating discovery. In a weedy, overgrown area near Strawberry Creek, they found the body of a young woman in a torn white dress. It was Aquila. The discovery turned a missing person case into a homicide investigation, and the evidence against Kevin McCall became an avalanche. Forensic analysis of his car revealed fibers from Aquila's dress and traces of her blood. The DNA from underneath her fingernails was a direct match to him, a silent scream from the grave that pointed directly to her killer. The scratches he had attributed to his brother were now clearly identified as defensive wounds from his victim. Faced with the irrefutable physical evidence, Kevin McCall's story collapsed entirely. The quiet boy who had charmed his way into the Flood family's trust was unmasked as a violent killer. He was arrested and charged with the murder of Aquila Flood. The subsequent trial laid bare the chilling reality of the crime. The prosecution painted a picture of a possessive and jealous young man whose insecurities had festered into a murderous rage. The prom, a night that should have been a celebration, had instead acted as a pressure cooker for his volatile emotions. The defense offered little to counter the mountain of evidence. In the end, the jury needed little time to reach its verdict. Kevin McCall was found guilty of first-degree murder. At his sentencing, he remained silent, offering no apology, no explanation, no remorse for the life he had so brutally extinguished. He was sentenced to 26 years to life in prison. For the Flood family, the verdict was a legal conclusion, but it offered no real closure. A prison sentence could not bring back their daughter. It could not erase the images of her prom photos, now forever tainted by the horror that followed. The memory of her smiling face as she left for the dance became a source of unbearable pain. The case of Aquila Flood serves as a harrowing cautionary tale. It reveals the terrifying truth that the monsters we should fear are not always strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes, they are the ones sitting right beside us, smiling for the camera. The prom night promise, in this story, was a promise of trust, symbolized by a corsage and a rented tuxedo. Its betrayal was swift, absolute, and unforgiving. A night that began with a portrait of youthful hope ended in a car on a dark, secluded road, where a simmering rage exploded and a quiet boy became a killer, leaving behind nothing but a stolen future and the ghost of a promise written in blood. Case 3. The House Sitter's Horror. We now travel from the coasts of America to its heartland, to the city of Pocatello, Idaho. It is a place surrounded by the stark, rugged beauty of the Rocky Mountains, a community built on hard work and a sense of shared safety. In the fall of 2006, within this setting of presumed security, another story of adolescent trust and its catastrophic betrayal was about to unfold. This case, however, deviates from the familiar patterns of romantic jealousy or friendship gone sour. It is a story where the prom night promise is not one made between two people, but an implicit, societal promise, the promise of safety among friends, the unspoken pact that you are secure in the home of someone you know. It is a story about how that pact was shattered, not for reasons of the heart, but as a chilling tribute to a horror film. Cassie Jo Stoddart was 16 years old. By every measure, she was a remarkable young woman. She was an excellent student at Pocatello High School, known for her artistic talent, her sharp intellect, and her kind, gentle spirit. Her friends and family described her as vibrant and full of life, a girl with a powerful sense of right and wrong and a future she was eagerly sketching out. She was trusted, and she was trustworthy, a daughter her parents could rely on, a friend who was always there. In September 2006, this reliability led to an ordinary request. Cassie's aunt and uncle were planning to be out of town for the weekend. They asked if she would be willing to house-sit their sprawling home on the outskirts of Pocatello on the remote and sparsely populated Whispering Cliffs Drive. The job was simple: look after the house and their 3 cats and 2 dogs. For Cassie, a responsible teenager, it was an easy favor to grant a family member. She agreed without hesitation. The house, for that weekend, would be her domain, a place of temporary solitude and responsibility. On the evening of Friday, September 22nd, 2006, Cassie settled into the large, isolated house. Knowing she would be there alone, she decided to invite her boyfriend, 17-year-old Matt Beckham, to come over and keep her company. It was a typical teenage evening. They watched movies, talked, and enjoyed the quiet comfort of each other's presence in the spacious living room. A short time later, the doorbell rang. Standing on the porch were 2 of their classmates from school, 16-year-old Brian Draper and 16-year-old Tori Adamczyk. They were not close friends of Cassie or Matt, but they were familiar faces from the hallways of Pocatello High. In a small-town school, everyone knows everyone, at least by sight. Draper was the more outgoing of the 2, with a certain charismatic energy, while Adamczyk was quieter, more of a follower, often in Draper's shadow. Their arrival was unexpected, but not immediately alarming. They said they just wanted to hang out, to join the impromptu movie night. Cassie, welcoming and good-natured, let them in. The 4 teenagers, Cassie, Matt, Brian, and Tori, spent some time together, watching the film Kill Bill, Volume 2. For a while, the scene was one of mundane adolescent socializing. But there was an undercurrent to the evening that Matt Beckham would later recall as unsettling. Draper seemed overly interested in the house itself, asking for a tour. It was a strange request, but they obliged, showing him and Tori around the large, unfamiliar space. After about 2 hours, Draper and Adamczyk announced they were leaving. They said they were heading to a local movie theater. They walked out the front door, and Cassie and Matt were once again alone. They settled back onto the couch, resuming their movie, the brief interruption seemingly over. But Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk had not gone to the movies. Their visit to the house was not a social call. It was reconnaissance. Their entire pretense of friendship was a lie, a carefully constructed Trojan horse designed to gain access and assess the layout of their target. Instead of leaving the property, they drove their car down the street, parked it out of sight, and crept back towards the house on foot. Before they left, Draper had deliberately unlocked the basement door, creating their point of re-entry. Their motive was not robbery. It was not revenge. It was something far more sinister and detached. Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk were aspiring filmmakers, but their inspiration was not the craft of storytelling. They were obsessed with a slasher film genre, particularly the 1996 movie Scream. In that film, 2 teenage friends, Billy and Stu, terrorize and murder their classmates, motivated by a twisted desire for notoriety and a perverse sense of game playing. Draper and Adamczyk saw themselves in these characters. They wanted to create their own real-life horror movie with real victims. They had chosen their star, Cassie Jo Stoddard. They had been planning this for days. They had purchased a collection of dark clothing, masks, and gloves from a local pawn shop. They had acquired an arsenal of knives. And most chillingly, they had brought a video camera. They intended to document their crime, to create a permanent record of their murderous project, just as the killers in Scream had envisioned. They were not just committing a murder, they were producing it. After sneaking back to the house, they entered through the unlocked basement door. Upstairs, Cassie and Matt were completely unaware that the two boys who had just been their guests were now hiding in the darkness below, armed and waiting. Draper and Adamczyk began to enact their twisted script. They found the circuit breaker and cut the power to the house, plunging the living room into sudden, disorienting darkness. The power outage, lasting only a moment before the emergency lights flickered on, was enough to unnerve Cassie and Matt. The isolation of the house suddenly felt less like a comfort and more like a vulnerability. Then, one of the family dogs began to bark persistently at the basement door, its instincts sensing a threat the teenagers could not see. The atmosphere grew thick with a palpable sense of dread. For Matt, the feeling was overwhelming. He called his mother and asked her to come and pick him up. He told Cassie he was scared and didn't want to stay. He offered to let Cassie come with him, to stay at his house, suggesting her parents wouldn't mind given the strange circumstances. This was a pivotal moment, a fork in the road of fate. Cassie, ever the responsible one, declined. She had made a promise to her aunt and uncle. She was the house sitter. She couldn't just abandon the home and the pets she had been entrusted to care for. Her sense of duty, her unwavering integrity, sealed her fate. She told Matt she would be fine, that she would lock the doors and be safe. Matt's mother arrived around 11:30 p.m. He said goodbye to Cassie, leaving her alone in the vast, quiet house, and walked out into the night. It was the last time anyone other than her killers would see her alive. The moment Matt's car pulled away, Draper and Adamczyk knew their moment had come. Their primary target was now alone and vulnerable. They continued their campaign of terror. They made loud noises from the basement, trying to lure her down. They crept upstairs, moving through the house like ghosts, stalking her from the shadows. Cassie, now terrified, locked the doors and huddled on the couch in the living room, trying to calm her racing heart. Down in the basement, Draper and Adamczyk turned on their video camera. The footage they captured is one of the most chilling artifacts in the annals of true crime. In whispered, excited voices, they film themselves, their faces illuminated by the camera's small light. "We're going for a stealth kill," Draper whispers, his voice giddy with adrenaline. "Stay downstairs. Be quiet, we've got our gear. Knives and... yup, knives." They talk about their plan, their excitement palpable. There is no hint of hesitation, no glimmer of remorse. They are actors on a stage of their own creation. "I'm scared," Adamczyk says, a slight tremor in his voice, but it sounds less like fear and more like nervous anticipation. "I know, man," Draper replies, trying to sound like a seasoned professional. "But we have to. It's a go." They discuss their shared obsession, making a direct reference to the murders that inspired them. "We're going to be like the guys from Scream," Draper says. They agree that they should blame their actions on Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the perpetrators of the Columbine High School massacre, another event that held a dark fascination for them. Then they prepare to go upstairs. The camera is still rolling as they make their final ascent. "Good luck, bro," one says to the other. "See you on the other side." They burst into the living room, their faces covered by masks. Draper in a haunting, pale mask reminiscent of Scream's ghost face, Adamczyk in a dark ski mask. Cassie was likely asleep on the couch, exhausted by the fear and stress of the evening. She had no chance to defend herself. The attack was immediate and savage. They descended upon her, stabbing her again and again. The official cause of death would later be determined as 29 stab wounds. 12 were potentially fatal. It was an act of extreme, gratuitous violence, far beyond what was necessary to end a life. It was a performance of brutality, an explosion of pent-up rage and twisted fantasy. After the murder, they remained in the house. The video camera was turned on again. The post-mortem footage is even more disturbing. They are no longer whispering. Their voices are loud, triumphant. "I just killed Cassie," Draper exclaims, a horrifying boast. "We just killed Cassie." They film each other, congratulating themselves. Adamczyk, the quieter of the two, seems to be in a state of shock, but Draper is exultant. He describes the murder in graphic detail, recounting how he saw the life leave her eyes. "Dude, I just saw her die," he says, a note of awe in his voice. That was crazy. They had fulfilled their fantasy. They had created their own horror movie, and Cassie Jo Stoddart was their unwilling star. They locked the house, left her body on the living room floor, and drove away, their camera holding the record of their monstrous achievement. 2 days later, on Sunday, September 24th, Cassie's aunt and uncle returned home. They walked into a scene of unimaginable horror. Their niece, the girl they had entrusted with their home, lay dead in a pool of blood. The promise of safety had been violated in the most horrific way imaginable. The investigation, led by the Bannock County Sheriff's Office, moved quickly. Matt Beckham was the first person they questioned. He told them everything he knew about the strange visit from Draper and Adamczyk, the power outage, the dog barking at the basement door, and his own sense of overwhelming fear. He told them how he had left Cassie alone. His story provided the detectives with their first and only lead. When investigators brought Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk in for questioning, they were met with flat denials. The boys claimed they had gone to the movies after leaving Cassie's house-sitting job and then went home. But their stories, like so many fabricated alibis, began to fray at the edges when pressed for details. Draper, in particular, could not seem to keep his story straight. He was arrogant, overconfident, and he began to talk. He led the investigators on a wild goose chase, attempting to pin the blame on others. He even showed them a note he claimed to have found from a fictitious killer. But his attempts to mislead the police only deepened their suspicion. Then he made a fatal mistake. He led them to a remote location in the Black Rock Canyon area, a place where he claimed the real killers might have hidden evidence. And there, buried under dirt and leaves, investigators found a trove of incriminating items: dark clothing, masks, a partially burned logbook detailing their plans, and a collection of knives. Most importantly, they found the videotape. When the detectives watched the tape, they were no longer looking at suspects. They were looking at killers. The footage was an undeniable, self-produced confession. It was the entire crime, from planning to execution to celebration, documented by the perpetrators themselves. Confronted with the video, both boys confessed, though each tried to blame the other for being the ringleader, for striking the fatal blows. Adamczyk, in his confession, wrote a chillingly detached account. "We entered the house. Brian was on her left side, I was on her right. He was on her legs, I was on her head. I stabbed her a couple times, so did Brian. We left." The trials of Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk were a mere formality. The video evidence was presented to the jury, who watched in stunned silence as the two teenagers they saw in the courtroom transformed on screen into cold-blooded killers. Both were found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, citing the heinous and cruel nature of the crime, sentenced both 16-year-old boys to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart sent a shockwave through the community of Pocatello. It was a crime that defied easy explanation. It was a betrayal not of a romantic promise, but of a fundamental societal one. It was a stark lesson in the terrifying reality that evil can wear a familiar face, that it can be born not from passion, but from a cold and empty desire to imitate art in the most gruesome way possible. Cassie died because of her sense of responsibility, her refusal to break a simple promise to her family. Her killers, inspired by a fictional world of horror, brought that fiction into reality, and in doing so, created a tragedy that was all too real. Her story is a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters are the ones who believe they are merely playing a game. Case 4. The Promise After the Dance. For our final folio entry, we journey to the state of Connecticut, to the picturesque and affluent town of Milford. It is a place known for its quaint New England charm, its scenic shoreline along the Long Island Sound, and the perceived tranquility of its suburban life. Here, in the spring of 2014, the rituals of youth played out against a backdrop of historic homes and manicured lawns. And at Jonathan Law High School, the junior prom was, as always, the most anticipated event of the year. It was a night for promises of a perfect evening, of lasting memories, and for some, of a love that felt as boundless as the ocean nearby. Marin Sanchez was 16 years old, and she was the heart of her school. She was more than just a popular student. She was a force of positive energy. Marin was the class president, a manager for the school's softball and swim teams, and an honor roll student. She was a member of the drama club, her face a familiar and welcome sight on stage. She dreamed of being a fashion designer, and with her vibrant, creative spirit, it was a dream no one doubted she would achieve. Her friends described her as a person who made everyone feel included, someone who radiated kindness and had a smile that could light up a room. She was, in every sense, a promise of a bright future. That spring, the prom was foremost on her mind. She had found the perfect dress-a-beautiful, flowing gown in a striking shade of turquoise blue. She had a date, a new boyfriend, and she was looking forward to the night with an infectious excitement. She had even agreed to serve on the prom committee, helping to create the perfect night not just for herself, but for her entire class. Entangled in the story of Marin's prom is 16-year-old Christopher Plaskin. Chris was a classmate, someone Marin had known for years, since middle school. They were friends, not best friends, not part of the same inner circle, but their paths crossed frequently in the social ecosystem of Jonathan Law High. Chris was known as a quiet, somewhat awkward boy. He was on the football team, but he was not a star athlete. He was a decent student, but not an academic standout. He was largely unassuming, a face in the crowd who seemed to harbor a deep and private crush on the effervescent Marin Sanchez. According to friends, his affection for Marin was an open secret. He had liked her for a long time, watching her from afar with a quiet intensity. He saw in her the same thing everyone else did, a radiant, kind, and beautiful person. In the weeks leading up to the junior prom, Chris Plaskin decided to act on his long-held feelings. He decided to ask Marin to be his date. This is where the first promise of our story was made, though it was a promise Marin could not keep. She had to turn him down. She did so kindly, gently, as was her nature. She explained that she already had a date. She was going with her new boyfriend. For Marin, it was a simple, unfortunate matter of timing. It was a polite refusal, an act of honesty. She had no reason to believe it was anything more than a moment of fleeting disappointment for a friend. But for Christopher Plaskin, this rejection was not a minor setback. It was a cataclysm. In his mind, the prom was not just a dance. It was a culmination, a fantasy he had constructed in which he would finally be with the girl he was obsessed with. Her refusal did not just close the door on a single evening, It shattered the entire narrative he had built around her. The rejection festered, transforming his quiet adoration into a dark and dangerous obsession. He couldn't have her. And in his twisted, adolescent logic, if he couldn't have her, then no one could. The prom was scheduled for the evening of Friday, April 25th, 2014. The school was buzzing with anticipation. Students walked the halls in a state of giddy excitement, talking about their plans, their dresses, their dates. Marin Sanchez was at the center of this energy, her own excitement palpable. That morning, she and a friend were in the hallway, showing each other pictures of their prom dresses on their phones, laughing and looking forward to the night ahead. Christopher Plaskin saw her there. He approached her in a stairwell, a place of transit, a space between classes where students flowed past each other, largely oblivious. The school day had just begun.
He wanted to talk to her one last time.
He asked her again, not just about the prom, but about them. He asked if she would be his girlfriend. He was making a final, desperate plea for his fantasy to become reality. Marin once again had to say no. She was with someone else. She was happy. She was looking forward to her life, a life that did not include him in the way he so desperately wanted. This final rejection was the spark that ignited the rage he had been nursing. The promise he had sought was definitively broken, and in that instant, he decided to make a new, unspoken promise to himself, a promise of destruction. He pulled a steak knife from his pocket, a weapon he had brought from home. And in the busy, brightly lit hallway of Jonathan Law High School, as students rushed to their first period classes, Christopher Plaskin attacked Marin Sanchez. The assault was frenzied, a shocking explosion of violence in a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary of learning and safety. He stabbed her in the neck and chest, again and again. It was over in seconds. Marin collapsed to the floor, her life bleeding out onto the polished linoleum. Her friend, who witnessed the attack, screamed in horror. The sounds of a normal school morning were shattered by an act of unimaginable brutality. A school resource officer and staff members who heard the commotion rushed to the scene. They found Chris Plaskin standing over Marin's body, the bloody knife in his hand. He was strangely calm, his face a blank mask. He offered no resistance. He simply dropped the knife and allowed himself to be taken into custody. As he was led away to the principal's office, he told the officer, "I did it. Just arrest me." Paramedics arrived within minutes, desperately trying to save Marin's life. They rushed her to Bridgeport Hospital, but her injuries were too severe. The knife had severed major arteries. A short time after arriving, Marin Sanchez, the girl who was supposed to be crowned prom queen that night, was pronounced dead. The news spread through the school like a shockwave, then through the town of Milford, then across the nation. A school day that had begun with the promise of a celebration had ended in an incomprehensible tragedy. The junior prom was immediately canceled. In its place, a heartbroken student body gathered that evening not for a dance, but for a vigil. They came together on the beach, holding candles, their formal wear put away, their faces stained with tears. They released purple balloons, Marin's favorite color, into the twilight sky, a silent, sorrowful tribute to the friend they had lost. The turquoise dress she was so excited to wear would never be worn. The legal proceedings that followed painted a grim picture of Christopher Plaskin's mental state. His defense attorneys argued that he was suffering from a psychotic episode, that he had been hearing voices and was not in control of his actions. They claimed he did not understand the gravity of what he had done. Friends testified that he had seemed more withdrawn and troubled in the weeks leading up to the murder, that he had allegedly told some of them he wouldn't mind if Marin were dead or hurt. These were red flags that, in retrospect, formed a terrifying constellation of warning signs, but at the time were likely dismissed as the strange, dramatic pronouncements of a troubled teenager. The prosecution, however, argued that this was not an act of psychosis, but an act of calculated rage. This was a murder born of rejection and obsession. The evidence suggested planning. He had brought a knife to school that day. He had sought Maren out. This was not a random act of madness, but a targeted execution of the person who had thwarted his desires. In the end, to avoid a lengthy and painful trial for the Sanchez family, a plea agreement was reached. In March 2016, Christopher Plaskin, now 18, pleaded no contest to the charge of murder. By pleading no contest, he did not admit guilt, but acknowledged that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict him. The courtroom was silent as Maren's parents delivered their victim impact statements. Her mother, Donna Cimarelli, spoke through tears, describing the unending nightmare her daughter's murder had created. "We will never see Maren again," she said. "We will never see her graduate from high school or college. We will never see her get married." Christopher Plaskin was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, he offered a brief, quiet apology to the Sanchez family, his first and only public words of remorse. The murder of Maren Sanchez is a stark and brutal illustration of how a promise, or the lack thereof, can become a catalyst for violence in a mind consumed by obsession. The prom night promise, in this case, was one that Maren rightfully could not and did not make. Her no was not an act of cruelty, it was an act of self-determination, her right to choose her own path and her own partner. But to her killer, that no was a betrayal of a fantasy he felt entitled to. Her death left an unfillable void in her community. In the years since, her family and friends have worked to keep her memory alive through the Maren Sanchez Memorial Fund, a charity that supports a wide range of youth activities in the arts, music, and sports, all the things Maren loved. They established Maren's Mile, a section of the beach in Milford dedicated to her memory. Her legacy is one of kindness and light, a stark contrast to the darkness that took her life. Her story serves as a tragic, final testament in our folio reminder that the most innocent rituals of youth can be shattered by the quiet obsessions brewing just beneath the surface, and that a promise refused can, in the wrong hands, be twisted into a death sentence. We have now closed the records on these 4 cases. For stories, for schools, for promises broken by betrayal and blood. From a friendship's trust violated in the woods of Pennsylvania to a quiet boy's rage on a lover's lane in Sacramento. From a horror movie fantasy played out in a house of supposed safety in Idaho to a fatal obsession born from rejection in the hallways of a Connecticut high school. These narratives, while unique in their details, are bound by a common, tragic thread: the devastating intersection of adolescent rites of passage and the darkest capabilities of the human heart. The prom night promise, in all its forms, is a symbol of hope, of a future just beginning. These stories stand as a solemn reminder that behind the smiles and the photographs, beneath the glittering lights of the dance floor, and within the quiet bonds of friendship, shadows can gather. They remind us that the trust we place in others is both a profound gift and a profound vulnerability. The memories of Skylar, Aquila, Cassie, and Maren endure not just as tales of loss, but as enduring calls for awareness, for compassion, and for a deeper understanding of the pressures that can lead a young mind to forsake a promise and choose a path of irreversible darkness. Thank you for joining us at the Crime Folio. May we all hold our promises and each other a little more carefully.
Good night.